In other words, no, not. It was just 42 separate times. In other words, they took up the tent from one place and went to another place. And they stayed there for a while, and then they took up the tent from one place and went to another place. They did that 42 times. Okay, keep that number in mind. This is just something that is so profound. Do you know that each one of us had to tabernacle for thousands of years before we could finally wind up in these bodies that we're in? We had to pitch camp more times than we can ever possibly count. Now, if you can trace your genealogy all the way back to Adam, you'll be able to find out how many times you had to encamp before you arrived where you're at right now. Let me explain what I mean by that. Here we have Egypt. And this is the wilderness. And this is the wilderness. Here they are wandering about, apparently aimlessly from anybody that's looking from an aerial view, as they meander through the wilderness, trying to make it to promised land. All right, so they had 42 different, okay, they encamped here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 42 different encampments. I'll just say 40 different stops. All right. Now I'm going to make this next point, and then we can close and we can maybe do some dialogue. Okay, let's go to Matthew chapter 1. You know, Matthew chapter 1, a lot of people just skip through it because it's nothing more than a whole bunch of boring, monotonous genealogies, right? Let's see if there's any link between these genealogies in Matthew and the encampments of Israel in the wilderness. Genealogy of Jesus, Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now he's starting with Abraham. He's not counting the genealogy of Christ all the way back to Adam. Isn't that interesting? In Luke chapter 3, Luke recounts the genealogy of Christ all the way back to Adam. Now, why is the Spirit instructing these men to do it this way? Because Christ had to be 100% flesh and 100% spirit. He had to be equally God and equally man. Matthew is trying to show how Christ inherited David's throne. So he traces his line back to Abraham. Okay, because Abraham was the man that God first gave the covenant to, and David inherited the throne because of his affiliation with Abraham. But Christ also had to be Son of Man. So somehow we have to trace his genealogy from Adam all the way down to the time that he actually came into the flesh. So Luke gives us the history of Christ through Mary, and Matthew gives us the history of Christ through Joseph. Now, Christ was not physically descended upon Joseph, was he? From Joseph, was he? So how does he inherit the throne of David? That's an interesting question, isn't it? What legal mechanism, what legal right did God have to give Christ the throne of David when he was not physically born of that house? At least not according to the kingly succession. He didn't come physically through the line of one of the kings. So how does God allow him to have the throne?
Didn't Mary's genealogy?
Yeah, but the one thing is, we have to understand one thing. According to the kingly succession, no king could reign unless he was a physical descendant upon one of the kings that reigned upon the throne. Now, David had 2 sons, but the one through which Mary came had a blood curse on her line because of what happened with Judah and Pharez. I wish we had more time to go into that, but the line of Mary had a blood curse on her line. So to make a long story short, the reason why Christ inherited the kingship was because he was born in the house of Joseph. He was the male that was born to Joseph's wife in his house.
You said Mary had a blood curse, or was it David?
It was a line of, well, it was a line of, yeah, there you go. Nathan had a blood curse.
Okay.
One of David's sons. Okay?
David's son.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And so I'm just trying to make an interesting point, and we can go over it a little bit later.
Okay.
But the point I'm trying to make is that this is the reason why he had to split the genealogy. Matthew tries to show us that this is how Christ inherited his right to reign as king, through Joseph. It was simply because he was born in the house of Joseph. He's not physically descended from Joseph, but Joseph himself was a physical descendant from David. And because of that, because Christ was the first son born into his house, he is of Beth Joseph, house of Joseph. And because of that, he is able to reign as a king. But he has to be son of man also. And so Luke takes care of that by giving his genealogy all the way from Adam until the time he came into his flesh. But we're about to see something really fascinating by looking at these verses. Abraham begot Isaac in verse 2, and Isaac begat Jacob. Jacob begat Judas and his brethren. Now that's Judah. That's okay. And Judah begat Pharez and Zerah of Tamar. And Pharez begat Esrom, and Esrom begat Aram, and Aram begat Amminadab. Now I'm not going to go through all those, but basically that's the succession through which Christ came. Now let's go on down to verse. Let's go on down to verse 17. After all the generations of Christ, here's what happens in verse 17. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14. From Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David to the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations. And from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. When we take 14 and multiply it times 3, what do we get? 42. 14 times 3? 42. Yeah, 42. Now, why am I taking up your time to make this point? Because each one of these encampments, each one of these 42 encampments of the children of Israel, at the end of that represented the birth. They were in the promised land. They had to go through 42 successive encampments in order to get there. What God is showing us through an incredible type is that from the time God came and gave the promise of the covenants to Abraham, okay, back in Genesis chapter 15, the seed of Christ, who was in Abraham's loins, had to go through 42 different encampments in that dark, dusty wilderness of all the different wombs that he had to travel through, and all the different men's bodies that he had to travel through. All these different encampments represent the different people, his genealogy. It was a different encampment when he went from, you can look at it like this, all the different encampments of Jesus Christ. It's just like the children of Israel. Because see, and as in Adam, the whole human race does what? We all die. So in Christ, all shall be made alive. That means that every human being on this earth had to be represented in Adam. Because all of us are seed of Abraham, of Adam. But all of us that are hoping to be resurrected and transformed are also in Christ. Okay? So, Christ is showing us here that even as the nation of Israel came out of Egypt and came out of bondage, now they came out through water, didn't they? Anytime a child comes through the womb, he comes through water. The water breaks, and the child is born. There's so many analogies that you can learn from the spiritual kingdom just studying the way our bodies work. Because God made us in his image and after his likeness. What God is showing us here is that the seed that was planted in Adam, which contained the physical house of Christ, had to encamp in the wilderness, in the inner wilderness of the womb, and the inner wilderness of the man's loins for 42 different generations, wandering as it were in the wilderness. What he's trying to show us is how literally our bodies are the temple and the tabernacle of God. Because right now, we have individuals inside us that are dwelling and tabernacling, and we were dwelling and tabernacling for a long time before we finally came into our promised land. Now you and I are in the promised land, operating as priests. The man is a priest, but each man's wife represents the holy place. Your wife represents the tabernacle in which you minister. The whole purpose of your marriage is to set forth an example of what Christ is doing in the church. The whole purpose is to reconcile the two back into one. This is the reason why Christ said that in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage. Because before sin came, there were no two apartments of the sanctuary. There were one. Because of sin, the veil of separation came.